certain places in this thermal area to keep us safe. The ground under us was deemed bearable for all of our weight day in and day out, so it's very important that we stay on them whenever we're exploring our thermal areas. The ground around us can be very fragile and very dangerous, so I think that's a dog. Let's stay on our boardwalks and our trails. Thank you very much, and let's be very, very safe when we're viewing our wildlife. We've got to keep 25 yards between ourselves and a bison or an elk, especially an elk this time of year. We're getting into the elk rut. They can be very, very aggressive. We got to keep 100 yards away from our bears and wolves. Sound good, folks?
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Now, before we get into this, I always like to ask, who thinks they traveled the farthest to be here today? Let me know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Corpus Christi, Texas.
Athens, Georgia.
Athens, Georgia, my neck of the woods.
Harpers Ferry, West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Virginia.
Canada. Yes.
Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Whoop.
Louisiana, all right.
New Orleans.
Well, Germany, but not today. Okay, but still. All right, I always wait till we have out of the country folks.
Right.
But just that small sample of folks on the boardwalk today lets you know just how far and wide people come from every single day to view not only Yellowstone but Old Faithful. And so there must be a very, very specific reason that all these folks from all over the place are spending all this money and taking all this time to plan a journey out here. And so for the next 10 minutes, I just want to give a brief overview of how this place became a national park, why we have features like Old Faithful here that attract all our visitors, the differences between all of our hydrothermal features that you'll see in the park, and then finally, I'll delve into a little bit more about the star of our show that we'll be looking forward to around 2:04, and that's Old Faithful. All right, so another question for you. How many of you know why this park is called Yellowstone? It's okay, I didn't know either before I came here, but that name's actually been used since around 1805 by the Minnetaree tribe. And they were actually founded out of a place about 100 miles north, downstream the Yellowstone River in Montana. On either side of that river, you will find yellow stones. And so the early trappers that came through, they met up with the Minnetaree tribe. They heard them call this place Yellowstone, and so as they explored farther south, they brought the name with them. And so if you visit the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone found in our park up in Canyon Village, you'll see that same yellow sandstone. Always like to share that bit of information with folks before we get into it, but we're gonna fast forward about 65 or so years to the year 1870, when we had some of our first expeditions come through. A gentleman by the name of Washburn led an expedition to this area, and he and his men were very, very excited by what they saw, things like Old Faithful, but they had no idea what to call it. So when they returned home and told everyone about it, they said, "We witnessed a reverse waterfall spurting water into the air every 65 minutes. And everyone else around said, "Oh, they're a little bit too dense to come up with something like that, so we need to go and see it for ourselves." 1 year later, 1871, a gentleman by the last name of Hayden brought a USGS survey group out here to see just what these reverse waterfalls were all about. Sure enough, they saw Old Faithful. They even saw some of our other geysers that were super spectacular. And he brought along some people to help spread the word of this place and that it's actually real. So he brought along an artist, Mr. Thomas Moran. He captured some amazing landscape shots of this place and painted them on a canvas. You may recognize that name, seen his artwork before. We also had a photographer to actually capture the real reality of this place, and that was Mr. William Jackson. So his print photographs helped spread the word far and wide. Not only that, but the following year in 1872, some literature helped us out, and Mr. Hayden himself wrote in the American Journal of Science and Arts that a bill has been put forth to Congress for its purpose, the setting aside of this wonderland as a great national park for all time. Now 151 years later, here we all are enjoying that same national park. Pretty impressive, pretty forward thinking for the 1800s, if you think about it. Hey, there's a really cool place. We need to make sure everyone can enjoy it. We need to make sure it's protected for all time. But whenever I was discussing how this place became a national park, I did not mention our bison or our bears or our actual waterfalls or stunning mountain views. No, the reason why we have this place and all national parks after it is because of our hydrothermal features like Old Faithful. So why do we have them here, and why do we have the highest concentration of them in the entire world? We have 10,000 hydrothermal features. The answer lies in this orangish blob that I have on the map. This shape represents the boundary of the caldera of a supervolcano, some might call it, that last had an eruption 640,000 years ago. Now, during that last eruption, it was not anything explosive and violent like Mount St. Helens. It simply pushed its magma chamber up through the surface, lava flowed across the landscape, and helped to form these mountains that we have around us. They are all lava flows. Once that was all said and done, sank back down and formed a giant crater-like formation. We call it a caldera. Now, this boundary also represents kind of where we're sitting on top of a still very active and very hot chamber of magma. We call it a hot spot. And our tectonic plate that we're on has slowly shifted over that hot spot, so it's helped to create the Snake River Plain. And now it gives rise to all of our hydrothermal features in the park. It's very, very hot, molten rock, not super liquidous, mostly solid rock, but it is still heating up the water that's under us, and that is pushing water up through the cracks in the rhyolite or volcanic rock that's under us. And then when the water appears on the surface, it will take shape in 4 different ways. Those are the 4 hydrothermal features you'll find in the park. So, hydrothermal, that word, 2 parts. We've already covered the second part, thermal, comes from the magma, but the hydro part, the water part, that comes from precipitation. So all of our rain, snow, and ice that we get in the park, and we do get quite a lot of it, will sink down through the surface, go down, maybe about 1.5 miles down, and get pushed back up through those cracks in the rhyolite. And most of our features are a function of just heat and water, especially our hot springs. So has anyone been able to see hot springs in the park already? Nice, yeah. So those hot springs, they're mostly stagnant pools of water, but a lot of folks are curious about where the awesome colors come from. A lot of people think, maybe minerals, but it's actually trillions of living bacteria. We call them thermophiles, meaning they love the heat, and they will appear in colors like greens and oranges and yellows. They can only survive in water up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So where you see bright blue in the middle of a hot spring, we know that water is above that temperature and is super, super scalding hot. But where you see those awesome colors near the boardwalk, it's very important that we leave those alone. They're living organisms that create more ripples up the food chain. If we decide to step on them or write our names in them or anything like that, we want to make sure we are keeping our park colorful, letting those bacteria mats stay where they are. Now, we also have something called fumaroles or steam vents, and they're a function of heat and water as well. So much heat though and so little water that by the time it's reaching the surface, pretty much all steam, hence the name steam vent. Next, we also have mud pots. Has anyone been able to see mud pots already? Nice. Super, super awesome features. You won't find any in this basin, unfortunately, but head a little bit north, Fountain Paint Pots has some good ones. They're a function of heat and water as well, of course, but water that is so acidic, it's breaking down the surrounding rock, turning it into a liquid clay, and that bubbling you see, it's not boiling. Those are gases escaping from those chemical reactions, giving us that nice witch's cauldron effect. But what you will find in great numbers here in this basin are geysers. Geysers require heat and water as well, of course, but also a very important additional ingredient, and that is a constricted plumbing system. So that's shown here. This is a rough picture of what is underneath Old Faithful, and we learned and gathered this image from, hear me when I say this, 1993, when a team of professionals went onto the cone of Old Faithful and put a camera down. They found about 20 feet down we have a constriction in Old Faithful's plumbing system, of course. And if everyone wants a good size estimate of how wide that space is, if you hold out your fist, compare it to the size of the person's on your right and on your left, take the average size, that's about as wide as that constriction is, about 4 1/8 inches. So what that constriction does because it allows pressure to be built up in the chamber of water under Old Faithful. It's roughly in this field over here in between Little Split Cone Geyser and Old Faithful. It's about 40 feet down. And what will happen is this pressure will begin to build in the chamber, and this water will be over boiling point, about 300 degrees. Boiling point at this elevation is 199 degrees Fahrenheit. Now when pressure is high, boiling point's high. So what we're gonna see before the next Old Faithful, we're gonna see some splashing. We're gonna see some very, very small, what looks like mini eruptions. I promise that's not the eruption, folks. Do not leave your seats. It'll be coming very shortly. We call that pre-play, and what that's doing is it's allowing a little bit of pressure to escape at a time for the chamber to eventually allow the hottest water at the bottom closest to the magma flash into steam instantly, and then boom! We've got an Old Faithful eruption. That steam is going to travel up through this chamber and push the rest of the water up with it. How much water? 3,700 to 8,400 gallons per Old Faithful eruption. How old is that water? About as old as the last paintbrush strokes on the Mona Lisa. About 500 years old. Now, sometimes it goes so fast that it exceeds the sound barrier. That's really awesome. Old Faithful will exceed heights of 140 feet on average. It'll last about 3.5 minutes usually. It's about 100 minutes in between eruptions. So now, brings me to my next point. Why is Old Faithful so dang special? We have 500 geysers in this park. Some of them are even taller than Old Faithful. We have geysers all over the world. We even have geysers in space. So what makes this one so special? Well, if you look at Old Faithful and you look out farther in our basin, you only really see steam coming from one place here, whereas out in the basin you see steam coming from all over. They're all bumped up next to each other, all neighbors. Out there, the water supply and energy sources, kind of like a free-for-all, up for grabs for all of our features. They can kind of all be tapped into one source, whereas Old Faithful over here, kind of on its own. That means we have a very good idea of how long it takes the chamber to fill up, build the pressure, get ready for an eruption, making it one of the tallest and most predictable geysers in the whole world. Now, we implore you to go and enjoy the rest of our basin, enjoy our other features, because it's not just Old Faithful here, one of very many, and in a place like a geyser basin, the only constant is change. We get thousands of earthquakes every single year here in Yellowstone, and if you can imagine, that can greatly affect what goes on underneath our features. That can turn hot springs into geysers. That can shut geysers off completely. So this next Old Faithful eruption is going to be different than anyone that's ever happened, and it's going to be different than anyone that will ever happen again. So we want you guys to enjoy it, whether it's your first, 5th, or 500th time watching Old Faithful, probably like me at this point. It'll be easy to understand what Washburn and what Hayden felt whenever they first visited this place 150-ish years ago. That is very special. That it should be protected for all time, and that everyone should see it and enjoy it, because there will be a day where Old Faithful won't be erupting anymore. Enjoy our park, enjoy it safely. It's not going to be the same as it is this year, as the next time you visit it. So, hope everyone learned something from my little talk. I'll be here for a few minutes to answer questions, but enjoy that eruption. Thank you.
Thank you.
away.
Sorry. We can ask them. And I'll pay you the $100 when I see you next.
You haven't changed a bit.
Cheap all the way, right?
Okay.